In this video, we're going to cover every NES emulator available on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. The Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch has 5 NES emulator cores available for users to play with and enjoy their classic 8-bit titles. That being said, the two main ones that should really be focused on are Messen and Nestopia UE, but for completion's sake, I really felt like covering all 5. Thankfully, NES Emulation is pretty straightforward and easy to get set up, so let's go ahead and dive in. Now, before we get started with NES Emulation, just a couple things to remember. This guide is a continuation of my Retroarch install guide, so if you don't have Retroarch installed on your Xbox Series X and S, link to this will be in the description below for you to follow along with and get everything set up before diving into NES Emulation. You also want to make sure that you have a properly formatted USB hard drive, thumb drive, or external SSD, so that is covered in this video as well. But if you already happen to have Retroarch installed but not a properly formatted USB drive, you can check out these videos as well. But link to my emulation playlist is also in the description below for you to check out everything that you could do with your Series X and S. So to get started with NES emulation, we're going to need a couple things, the first of which being games, and these can be in a variety of format, including .NES, for just your standard NES ROMs, or .FDS for Famicom Disk System, and then we also have .UNF and .UNIF support, as well as zip support. So I have here my collection of NES games. They're mostly in .NES format, and then I have Metroid in .zip format just for demonstration purposes. Now, there are numerous ways of acquiring NES games. If you have a large physical collection, I really recommend the Retro Blaster Programmer. The old version is currently discontinued, but a new version is coming out soon, and it will allow you to dump your entire physical NES library quickly and accurately. Alternatively, you could also dump virtual console games from modded Wii, Wii U, or 3DS systems. The NES Classic games can also be dumped from that using Hackchi. Or, as always, you could just use the Googles and find some to download, but piracy is not supported on this channel, so don't ask me for illegal download links. They will not be provided. But once you have your games sourced and ready to go, just go ahead and copy them over to your Xbox's USB drive. So I put mine inside of a games folder, and there we go. They're good to go. Now, if you plan on doing any Famicom Disk System emulation, you are going to need a BIOS file for it. I don't own a Famicom Disk System, so I don't have a BIOS file for it, but if you acquire one, it needs to be named disksys.rom. And once you have it sourced, it just needs to go into your Retroarch system folder. So inside your Xbox's USB drive, go into your Retroarch folder, go into the system folder, and place it in here. And with the games and BIOS file in place, you can go ahead and close out of your Xbox's USB drive, take it out of your computer, and move it over to the Xbox, and get booted into Retroarch. Once inside Retroarch, we can begin loading up our NES games by going over to the Load Content menu, navigate down to your E drive, and then just scroll to where you have your NES games stored. Then you can choose an NES game, and select one of the available cores with which to play it. Alternatively, if you don't want to go through those long menus to get to your NES games, you can head over to the Import Content tab, click on Scan Directory, navigate over to your Games folder where you have your NES games, and tell it to scan this directory. And now back on the main menu, you will have a nice Nintendo Entertainment System playlist entry with all of your games included. And then to play a game, all you need to do is press A on it, and tell it to run, and select a core to associate with that game. So once again, the main cores that you're going to be most interested in are Messen and Nestopia UE. So for this video, we're going to start with Nestopia. So as you can see, runs like a dream. But we have a lot of content to cover, so we're just going to go ahead and start diving into some core settings you could do with this one. So going into our Retroarch quick menu, if you scroll down to the core options page here, our first set of options within Nestopia is the system tab, system region, so this is set to auto by default, but you can manually select a system region here if needed. Next up, Famicom Disk System auto insert, just recommend leaving that one on. Next up, in the Video tab, Blarg NTSC Filter. So these are built-in shaders for the NES core that let you mimic composite video, S-video, RGB SCART, or a black and white TV to great effect. So as you can see, looks pretty intense. and gives a really nice and authentic look. So personal preference on if you want to use those or not, otherwise just leave it off and use Retroarch's built-in shaders. Next up, palette. You can choose a custom palette here to use with your NES emulation. So the CXA 2025AS is actually one of my preferred ones, but any of the Firebrand X ones are also going to be very accurate and authentic to original NES hardware. So the NES didn't actually have a fixed color palette. The way it looked really depended on your TV at the time. So personal preference on any of these ones, on which one you think looks good for you. Next, we have a bunch of overscan masking options for the top, bottom, left, and right. So for in games like Mario Bros. 3, you could crop out the blue bar that's on the left side of the screen if desired using this tool. And finally, preferred aspect ratio. This is set to auto by default, but you can set it to whatever you prefer. I'm a big fan of 4:3, so that's usually what my go-to is. Next up, audio. First option, Game Genie sound distortion. So if you ever played with a Game Genie back in the day, you know it messed up the NES's audio output. So you can emulate that effect here if you want. Next, we have a Show Advanced Audio Settings tab. So we need to enable this to get those to show up. So just turn it on, exit your quick menu, come back in. And that's what gives you access to all the individual channel volume levels. So you can really fine tune your NES audio experience with this menu. Again, this is all going to be personal preference on what you want it to sound like, so you can just go ahead and mess around in here if desired. If not, you can just go ahead and turn this menu off and just never worry about it, and just enjoy the traditional sound as it is presented. Next up, audio output. This is set to stereo by default, so that way you get both channels coming with the audio, but you can set it to mono if desired. Next up, our input tab. First option, 4-player adapters. So if you're going to be playing 4-player games, this should work automatically to give you 4-player support. If not, you can set which region you're going to be using it for. The next option is to shift buttons clockwise. So by default, the NES's A button is mapped to the Xbox controller's B button, and then the NES controller's B button is mapped to the Xbox's A button. With this option, A is mapped to A, and B is mapped to X, giving it a more ergonomic feel. And the turbo buttons likewise will be shifted to Y and B. So personal preference on whichever you prefer here. We're going to skip over the next 3 options here because they don't actually work properly within Nestopia UE, and instead we'll go down to turbo pulse speed. Set to 2 by default gives you good turbo fire capabilities, but you can increase it to be faster if desired. Next up, emulation hacks. Our next option is to remove the sprite limit on NES games. So the NES had a sprite limit. When too many sprites were displayed on screen at one time, it would begin to cause issues. As you can see with Mega Man's life bar here, when I have a lot of bullets flying, you can see the life bar starts to flicker. So with this option on, that no longer happens. So personal preference if you like the original flickering sprites or if you want to have just solid graphics. Next up, CPU speed. This is an overclock option for your emulated NES CPU. So for games that would experience lag from too much happening on screen, you can increase this to 2 times the original NES CPU speed to counteract that. Should overall be a stable option, but there is always a small possibility it might break a game in question, so just give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, just turn it off. Next up, RAM power on state. So this lets you decide if you want to have certain values or random values stored in RAM as a game starts. This can cause a bunch of glitches and numerous exploits that you can achieve in games. It's pretty interesting to mess with, but for most people, you should just leave this on 0. And that's going to do it for our Nestopia core options. So as always, if there are options you want to have set for some games but not others, you can come up here to manage core options and save things as a game options file. Otherwise, all the settings will just be set per the core. But now let's go ahead and move on to Messen. So, going to tell a game to run. This time we're going to choose Messen as our preferred core. So here we are within the Messen core, and very accurate core. I love this core. But as you can see, it runs really well. But let's go ahead and cover the core options. So going back into our Retroarch quick menu, core options, And our first option is to apply a filter to the video output. So you could do composite S-Video, RGB, or monochrome using the Blarg filtering, which is pretty much the same we saw in Nestopia, so if you want to have black and white, there it is. But this time around, we also have 3 additional options with the Biscuit 2x, 4x, and 8x options. So these ones are more of a composite video filtering. And they look something like this. So again, personal preference on which one you want to use, or you could just use Retroarch's built-in shaders as well. Next up, palette options. So pretty much the same options as we saw in Nestopia UE here, but again, the Sony CXA2025AS is one of my preferred. I really love the contrast and the colors it gives, but you really can't go wrong with anything from Firebrand X as well. So again, this is all going to be personal preference on which one you like to use. So just pick whichever one you like and run with it. Next up, we have overclocking, so this will remove NES hardware limitations on games that were too demanding for the CPU. So a couple different options here. So as with all system overclocks, this might break some games, so use it sparingly. So give it a try, but if it causes issues, go ahead and turn it off. Then overclock type, just leave this on before NMI. Next, we have region select. This is set to auto by default, but you can manually set it here for any reason. Next, we have our 4 overscan options for every side of the screen for you to remove garbage data that you don't want to see. Next up, aspect ratio. This is set to auto by default, but you can change it to manually be whatever you want it to be. So if you want to stretch your games out because you have some form of widescreen patch applied to them, there you go. Next up, controller turbo speed. So this is for your extra 2 face buttons on your controller that act as turbo functionality buttons. Have it set to fast, very fast, slow, or normal, or turn it off entirely. Next up, shift A, B, X, Y clockwise. So by default, A on the Xbox controller is set to B for the NES controller, and B on the Xbox controller is set to A for the NES controller. With this option on, A becomes A, and X becomes B. And then the turbo buttons are shifted to Y and B. We're going to come back to the HD packs here in a second. So next up, remove sprite limit. So again, when there's too many things happening on a single scan line in NES games, it would cause sprites to flicker, as you can see with the Mega Man life bar here. With this option on, that flickering is removed. So personal preference on if you want to have solid graphics or the original look. Next up, enable fake stereo effect. So this will basically just clone the NES's mono output to both stereo channels. This is followed by 2 filtering effects that are on by default, so you can turn them off, see if you prefer them with them on or off. Personal preference here. And then our next 2 options are also for audio output for you to change the way things will sound. Again, personal preference, mess with them, see what you prefer. Next up, screen rotation. So this lets you rotate the screen for any NES games that might actually have a tape mode. So as you can see, rotated it. Very fun. And you could just rotate it all the way around. Next up, default power on state for RAM. This is set to all zeros by default, but again, you can set it to all ones or random values to cause unintentional glitching to your NES games. Again, pretty interesting to mess with in some titles, but for most use cases, you just want to leave this on all zeros. Next, we have a couple of Famicom disk system options. One is to automatically insert discs. I recommend turning that one on. And the next is to fast forward while loading, so this will make it so the load times are a lot shorter, so also recommend turning that one on. And our final option for Messen is for sound output sample rate. So if you want to increase the quality of your NES sound, you can up this to 96,000 for a nice clarity boost. Or if you want to lower the sound quality, you could do so here as well. But now moving back over to the Enable HD packs. Go ahead and set this option on and we'll cover how to get these loaded up in your games. So once it's enabled, just go ahead and quit out of Retroarch, because we're going to need to do some stuff on the computer. Now go ahead and take your USB drive out of the Xbox and put it back into your PC. So back over on your computer, go ahead and open up your Retroarch system folder. And inside we're going to create a new folder to house all of our Messen HD texture packs. So new folder, capital H, lowercase d, capital P, lowercase ACKS. Now just go ahead and enter this folder. Next, you'll need to find a Messen HD texture pack, and a good deal of them can be found on romhacking.net. So for my example, I'm going to be using Mega Man because this 16-bit graphics pack is just phenomenal. But there's a download link in the post here, so just going to go ahead and grab that real quick. And with that downloaded, just going to get it extracted. And inside you'll see all of the replacement textures. Perfect. Now to use this HD texture pack, we just need to get this folder that contains all of the replacement textures named after our game file. So I'm just going to head back out to the root of my USB drive, go to my games folder, find my NES games. So there we go, my game is called megaman.nes. So I'm just going to copy this file name as the name of my HD texture pack folder. Now going back into my Retroarch system folder, HD packs, drag it right on in, and it is now good to go. But before moving over to the Xbox real quick, I think it is worth noting that a lot of NES HD texture packs can include a number of customization options, so be sure to read over the documentation for the texture pack you are using. So for example, like in the Mega Man one here, you can play as Roll, you can play as helmetless Mega Man, like there's a lot of options available. It is also worth mentioning that games that are in zip format don't typically work with HD texture packs, so if you're going to want to play a game with an HD texture pack, you need to have the game extracted. But once you have all of your packs set and good to go, just go ahead and take your USB drive out of your computer and plug it back into the Xbox. So now when we head back into Mega Man, again I'm using the Messen core, it's set there on the right as you can see. It will now load the game up with my HD texture pack because I had that option enabled. And as you can see, it just gives the game a complete graphical overhaul. So there we go, HD texture pack enabled for Mega Man, and this one's really cool because it kind of gives us this option here. Includes a lot of extra features like having hints from Dr. Light here, but my back button, my select button is just being a little sketchy about showing it for some reason. But as you can see, it just gives the game an entirely new look. But with that, we have now covered all of the core options within Messen, so same deal as before with Nestopia. If there's any options you want to have set on a per game basis, you could head up to Manage Core Options and save them as a game options file. Otherwise, every option will just be set as a per core configuration. Alright, next up we are going to cover FCEUmm. Just another NES emulator, not as accurate as Nestopia or Messen, but it does run games, it supports retro achievements, and looks pretty decent. But as you can see, running Mario 3 here just fine. But let's go ahead and cover some of the core options available within it. So heading into the quick menu, core options, system options, you can set our region. And we actually have support for a Game Genie add-on. So this is going to make it act like the original Game Genie would. It would launch into the menu system and let you put in cheats before starting a game. But it does require you to have the Game Genie ROM file in the Retroarch system folder named as GameGenie.nes if you plan to use it. Next up in our video options, we have our aspect ratio, so it's set to pixel aspect ratio of 8:7 by default, but you can change this up to 4:3, or pixel perfect. Next, we have our overscan option, so again, this can help you remove garbage data on the sides of your screen. So for example, you can remove the 8 pixels of garbage data on Mario 3 here on the left side of the screen without any issue. Next up, color palette. Tons of color palette options available once again. So again, personal preference on which one you want to use. But again, the Sony CX-A 2025 AS is an awesome one, as well as any of the Firebrand X ones. But just go through and choose whichever one works best for you. And finally, NTSC filters. So this lets you choose between composite, S-Video, RGB, or monochrome filtering options to give you a more authentic look to the original console being run on those video outputs. and it does a good job. So personal preference if you want to use these or Retroarch's built-in shaders. Next up, audio tab, and our first option is sound quality. If you're on an Xbox Series S or X, you can change this to very high. Next, you can apply an audio RF filter, so this will give the audio a more muted sound to more mimic an RF connection. Next, you can apply stereo sound effects, so you can just change this to like 1 millisecond. Next up, swap duty cycles, so this is another audio option. It's going to be personal preference on if you like it or not. Then you can set the master volume for all of your NES emulation, and then you can disable specific sound channels to get a very unique sound for your NES games, or if you're really trying to document some way that the sound sounds, it's good for that too, I guess. But most users will not need to mess with this. Next up, input. Our first option is to enable turbo buttons, so you can enable it on player 1 or player 2 or both. Next, you can choose the turbo delay, so you can change this up between a number of different values to change the speed of your turbo buttons. We're going to skip over the zapper and Argonoid and mouse stuff and head down to allow opposing directions. So for different types of speedruns and things, this is an option that can be used to trigger different effects, but for most users it won't mean anything, so you can just leave it off. But lastly, we have the emulation hacks. So first up, the no sprite limit. So again, in Mega Man, when you have too many sprites on screen, you can see that it causes things to flicker. With the sprite limit enabled, that is no longer the case. So personal preference on if you like it on or off. Next up, we have overclock. So this again overclocks the emulated NES CPU to get better performance in games that would introduce hardware lag when too much was going on screen. So two options available. So the 2x post render is the most compatible, but the 2x VBlank can be more effective in certain titles. So give them a shot, see what you think. If you have issues, turn it off. And last up, RAM power on fill. So for most users, again, you'll want to have this set to 0. But if you want to mess with random effects that can be triggered, you could go ahead and set this to the F or random. Again, not going to be needed by most use cases, but still fun to experiment with. Now, if there's options you want to have set for some games but not others, you could head up to Manage Core Options and save them as a game options file. Otherwise, it will all just be saved as a per core override. Next, we're going to cover FixNES. So here's FixNES up and running on the Series S. But let's go ahead and dive into the options. So core options, there's none available. There's nothing to change about it. It just runs and plays how it's presented from the get-go. So this is going to be your very minimal effort NES emulator to get set up and running. And our final NES emulator that we are covering in this video is QuickNES. So this one is meant to be a very lightweight NES emulator for lower powered devices. So great for what it does, but there's other options available on Xbox that can do better. But I mean, it's not a bad NES emulator. I mean, there's really no such thing as a totally bad NES emulator these days, but let's go ahead and cover the core options here. So going down, core options. Our first one is aspect ratio. So this is set to the pixel aspect ratio by default, but you can manually set it to 4:3 if you prefer that. Next, we can disable or enable vertical and horizontal overscan. Next, we have our color palette. So again, number of options here. So pick whichever one you think looks best. I'm a big fan of the Sony CXA 2025. And again, anything from Firebrand X is going to be really authentic. Next, you could choose to enable or disable the sprite limit. So just decide if you like to have flickering graphics that were typical of the NES or if you want to remove that. Next up, audio mode. So this is set to nonlinear by default, which is the more accurate representation of NES audio output. You could change this to linear for a less accurate approximation, or you could enable a stereo panning. Next, you could choose your audio equalizer preset. So personal preference on which one you think sounds best, but give them all a try, see what you think. Next up, turbo enable. So you can enable turbo buttons for player 1, player 2, or player 1 and 2, and then adjust the turbo frequency. And our last option is to allow opposing directions, which is again most useful for speedrunners or other types of hacks. Not going to be really useful for most use cases. And with that, we've covered all the options within QuickNES. So again, if there's any options you want to save on a per game basis, you can head up to Manage Core Options and save them as a game options file. Otherwise, it'll just save everything on a per core basis. Now, the last thing we're going to cover in this video is the use of shaders. So heading into our Retroarch quick menu from within any of our NES cores, you can head down to the Shaders tab, press A to enable video shaders, and begin loading them up with the load button here. Go into your shader slang folder, and you can enable any types of effects. There's a ton that you can work with here, but some of my favorites are in the CRT tab here, so I really like CRT Easy Mode. I think it gives a really nice overall CRT appearance, and maintains a good amount of quality while also blending rougher pixels together. So this is one of my favorites. But other good options in the CRT filters include the CRT Royals, or if you want to mess with geometry distortion, one of the Geom ones. And one of the coolest ones that you can enable would be the Mega Bezel, which is in the Bezel tab here, but it is super demanding and a lot of times won't even load on the Xbox Series S or X, so you could give it a shot, but there's no guarantee that it's actually going to work. So as you can see, that one just isn't going to happen, so do be aware that some shaders just won't work on Series X or S. But once you find a shader that you really enjoy, head back into the shader tab, go down to the save option here, and apply this as a core preset, so that way every time you load up an NES game with that particular core, that is the option that will greet you. If you plan on using more than one NES core, you will need to do this with every single one that you plan to use. You could also set shaders on a per game basis by using the save game preset option at the bottom. But there you have it, every single NES core covered for the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. Overall, Nestopia UE and Messen are going to be the ones you use most, but if you want to experiment with all of them, I'm glad we could have those covered for you as well. But thank you so much as always for watching today's video. Hope it helps you get your NES games up and running to your desires on your Xbox Series X and S. But here at the end of the video, I do have a couple of big favors to ask. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit that thumbs up, thumbs down button, depending on how much you like today's video, as well as that sub button and notification bell so you can see when new videos go live on the channel. Loads of content coming your way, and I'd love to have each and every one of you along for the ride. For anyone interested in further helping support the channel and keep it going, you can also check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A little really goes a long way to keeping this place up and running and bringing all of this content directly to you. Big shout out to all of our current backers. Thank you so much for believing in what we do here and helping us keep it going for so long. You are all incredible. You're amazing. Thank you for being our champions. But until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, keep on gaming, and we'll see you back next video.